Number 1. The Lost Treehouse. My cousin Joey and I were the type who really loved to go out and explore wherever we could. When I was 11, I actually moved out to stay with his family for about a year. It was the first time really that I had hung out with him. He was on my dad's side of the family, and for some reason, before my parents got divorced, we didn't spend much time with Dad's side of the family. I honestly have no idea why, looking back on it. But my parents separated when I was 11, and that is why I went to stay with him for a while the divorce was going on. So Joey and I then began exploring the area where he lived. It was rural, which was a very new thing for me, having always been in the city. However, it didn't take long until we had explored just about every place around there, and exploring became redundant. When I was 15, though, my aunt bought a new house. Well, it was new for her. The house was, in actuality, a lot older than the one she previously had lived in. But it was also in a whole new area, and there were tons of hills, forests, and hollows for me and Joey to explore whenever I would come to visit. And so it was that when I was 15, on my very first day exploring this new area, that I had the scariest experience of my life up to that point. Joey had promised to wait until my first visit to do any exploring, and I was positive that we would have a lot of area to explore. When my dad pulled the car off the road, out of town, onto the gravel road, we drove on that road for nearly an hour before we came to my aunt's house. There were very few homes along the way, just a lot of hills and trees. Joey and I decided to make a full day out of our rural exploration. We brought a compass and some string to mark trees as we went along. Since we were completely new to this area, there was so much better of a chance of us getting lost. So we were having a pretty good day right into the afternoon. Truly, the area was much more interesting than that which I'd experienced before. There were different kinds of trees and animals. Hell, I actually heard and saw a woodpecker for the first time in my life. Unfortunately, however, he didn't have a goofy laugh or engage in any zany antics. But all in all, we were having a good time. We noticed something odd in the late afternoon. We couldn't tell what it was until we got close to it. But when we did, both of us were surprised to see an old tree house built into a really large trunk tree. It was weird because there were not any homes or anything anywhere close to the area, and tree houses were mainly a thing for children. So it seemed odd to see one out in the middle of the hills and forest like that. There wasn't a ladder or anything to get up into the tree house. However, we were both good tree climbers, so we were able to make our way up the branches of the tree. From there, we were able to get into the door of the structure, and right away, we almost wished that we hadn't. The inside of that treehouse was something out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets the Blair Witch Project. The floor of the treehouse was covered in bones, which we figured had to be animal bones due to their size. There were little figurines and things made of tying bones together with feathers and strings and things like that. Plus there were symbols and words painted all over the inside of the house. And no, I don't mean things like pentacles. Those are not evil things. There was graffiti hailing and praising evil entities and words in other languages. But the worst thing was something we found, sitting on a small wooden stand. It was a really old journal of some sort. Most of it was unreadable, really. Who knows how long it had been sitting there. We flipped through and tried to read as much as we could. There were ghastly drawings of people being mutilated and tortured. The drawings had names and descriptions. Of course, we had no way of knowing if these were of real people or not, since we didn't know how long that book had been sitting there, so we didn't know when it was written. But if it was a plan on doing these things to these people, it was a really sick thing to read. I mean, they described disembowelments, quartering, and all sorts of grim and disgusting things in quite a bit of detail. It was some pretty sick crap. And we spent more time in the treehouse than we probably meant to. When we finally climbed down, it was turning into early evening. We started home immediately after that. We brought the book with us and one of the bone figurines. It was sort of sickening, but we wanted to show Joey's parents what we had found. We were pretty excited about the whole thing, I won't lie. I bet that is something obvious by us bringing the pieces back. But that doesn't mean that we weren't also a bit frightened. It would be an absolute understatement to tell you that we were scared. I mean, I don't know if it is really true that killers kill animals before moving on to humans, but it was obvious that whomever owned that treehouse must have killed plenty of animals. And even if they never killed a person, they had a book outlining how they would do it. We got a pretty weird reaction from Joey's parents. They took the book and the figurine from us. They basically told us that although it was okay for us to go exploring, we had to be careful, be mindful of other people's property, and to be careful when entering old, abandoned buildings. I don't know what became of the book and the figurine. I wish I did, because I think showing them while this story is being told would be awesome. But this happened a good 25 years ago, and my aunt claims to have no memory of it. Joey remembers, of course, but he never got a hold of the book and figurine again, so neither of us have any idea at all what happened to them. Number 2. Shock. This isn't a long story, but it sure is a scary one. I mean, it's the scariest thing to have ever happened to me in my entire life. When I was young, my family bought a nice house in a quiet suburb. It was a cool house with a huge attic, a huge cellar, and best of all, it had an actual tree house in the backyard. It was a sturdy wooden tree house set on a strong tree. There were pieces of wood nailed into the tree to form a ladder, leading up to the entrance to the tree house. The tree house became a major part of my childhood. I spent a lot of time up there with friends, and even slept in there during the summer occasionally. It's hard to imagine doing that now, because when you're a kid and having fun, you might not care much whether or not you have air conditioning. It was hot, but it was also fun not having to be in the house. On this particular night, I was sleeping in the treehouse with my brother. It was a nice night. We were talking about girls and stuff. Eventually, we put our lantern out and went to sleep. Something woke me up late at night. It was dark, and I didn't know what had woken me up at first. I looked around, trying to see if my brother had gotten up. Maybe he had to go into the house to take a leak. Okay, I'll be honest. He would have just peed out the door of the treehouse onto the ground. But hey, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But my brother was lying next to me in his sleeping bag. Then as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized what the noise was. Looking over at the entrance to the treehouse, I noticed a form starting to rise over the door. There was someone climbing up the ladder into the treehouse. At first I thought it might be my dad. I mean, he never came to the treehouse, but he might have had a reason to. But as the guy rose into the doorway, I realized it was not someone that I had ever seen before. I grabbed my brother and shook him. He woke up quickly enough and asked what was wrong. But then he noticed the guy and sort of screamed a guy scream. I know, not something you hear very often. The figure came into the treehouse. My brother quickly moved back against the wall. The things that happened next are a bit fuzzy, but I will try to tell them the best that I remember them. I came in contact with the guy, but I'm not sure if he came after me or if I went after him. It's possible I tried to knock him out of the treehouse, but it didn't work that way. I was grabbed by him, and the next thing I knew, I was thrown out of the treehouse. I fell all the way down and landed on my back. I didn't get knocked out right away, but everything was fuzzy. All I could do was yell for my father. I couldn't even move, but I weakly yelled and then tried to yell louder and louder. I heard a struggle in the treehouse, and I worried about my brother. I wanted to get up and help him, but I wasn't able to do that. All I could do was call out and worry about what might be happening to my brother. I did black out then. I was in the hospital later. 2 of my vertebrae were broken in the fall. The guy who broke into the treehouse was a homeless guy. He probably thought that no one was in the treehouse and that it would be a good place to sleep. He was very much out of his mind and was put into a psychiatric ward afterward. Fortunately, my brother was not hurt, but we both suffered problems mentally after what happened. If you've never woken up in the dark and seen a dangerous person simply appear, you cannot imagine the terror that we felt. It was beyond frightening, and it made us think it was going to happen over and over again. Number 3. Night Out. I was a very lucky kid to have a treehouse when I was growing up. We had a tree in our backyard that was absolutely perfect for setting a treehouse on it. Both of my parents thought it was a good idea, so my dad and I were able to build one from scratch. It was a nice-sized treehouse where several people could hang out in it with plenty of room. We built a rope ladder which could be pulled up into the treehouse after entering, and there was even a trap door. We got that idea from watching The Simpsons. Well, the whole idea of the treehouse probably came from The Simpsons, I guess. Well, I love that treehouse more than anything in the world. My best friend Toby and I would even have sleepovers in the treehouse. That was always the coolest thing because we had a little television, sleeping bags, snacks, comic books, you name it. And the best thing was that we were unsupervised when we were there. We did all the things you would expect kids in a treehouse to do. We made s'mores. We told ghost stories. It was awesome. It was a warm summer evening. Toby and I were planning a night over in the treehouse. We even were able to convince my parents to loan us a VCR overnight. We watched Freddy Krueger movies, and it was very fun. As is usual with sleepovers, we obviously did not go to sleep right away. It got really late into the night, and that's when things got interesting. From being high up in the treehouse, we could see a lot of things, and that was the coolest part of all. We even had a small telescope that we used to spy on people. I always liked doing that. I think that there is a voyeur in all of us to a little extent, and I always found it very interesting that we could spy on people, and they had no idea, and never would, that they were being watched. The neighborhood was dark, and that was always the best part of the night. It made watching the movies much scarier. It also just enhanced everything. While a movie was playing in the background, we kept trying to find something interesting. And that's when I had my rear window moment. It wasn't far away, though, either. I noticed something across the street. There was a man on the side of one of the houses right across the street. It was a window in the back of the side, and he was using something to pry it open. Now, I knew the person who lived in that house. It was an elderly woman, and she lived alone. So what I was witnessing was an attempted break-in. I got Toby's attention, and he noticed it too. But rather than keep quiet like I was doing, he yelled, "Holy crap!" So loud, it got the guy's attention. The burglar was now looking right at us across the street, and he realized what we were doing. The guy stood there for a moment. Then he must have decided that having witnesses to his crime was not a good thing. So he gave up and started to come across the street. He had some sort of tool in his hand. It was whatever he was using to try and get into the old woman's house. I realized our rope ladder was down. so I began pulling it up, and then I began yelling and screaming for my dad. The guy made it across the street and was in our yard. I got the rope ladder up before he got close enough to use it, but climbing the tree would not be the most difficult thing for him to do. The light in my parents' room came on, and my dad opened the window. He quickly saw what we saw. A strange man with some sort of crowbar had made it over to our treehouse and was trying to get up the tree. There was some rumbling in the house. Suddenly I heard a crash and realized my dad had knocked the screen out of his window, and he had his gun pointed right at the guy in the treehouse. My dad didn't fire, but he got the man's attention. My dad told him to get down off the tree and get out of our yard. If he climbed even one more inch, my dad would shoot him. For a moment, I really thought the man was going to try my father's limits. The moment between the threat and the man's next movement was tense. But finally, the guy jumped off out of the tree. He yelled some stuff at my father, and then he ran out of the yard. He was picked up by the police shortly after. I stopped having sleepovers in the treehouse for a while. It was just too scary to do, but eventually I went back to it. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story that you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address provided in the description. But most importantly, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.